we're jumping right in here now. Like, you know, you've obviously got, you know, eating animals, you've got all the isms, you know, ageism and racism and feminism, and there's so many isms that there are in the world, yet across them all is a common denominator amongst all impressions is it comes down to relationships and how we relate to one another. And you've been incredible at deciphering that down into a formula, into a simple formula that, you know, it sounds quite right brain or whichever left brain, you know,
left brain.
It sounds very kind of technical, but it's a really wonderful formula that has really, you know, helped us understand communication and interpersonal relationships.
Yeah, well, thank you. Do you want me to share the formula? Is that like an invitation?
Let's give us this magical formula. This formula to solve all your relationship problems. Are you ready for it, folks?
Have your pen and paper ready. Have your pen and paper ready.
This is definitely one. If you don't have a pen and paper, get your phone out and open up the notes app.
Save the world with a formula. Okay, formula for a better world. Yeah, I mean, so when we talk about injustice, you know, often when we're talking about any form of injustice, we're talking about it through the lens of like philosophy or sociology, sometimes economics. I mean, these lenses matter, of course. And there's been a neglected sort of lens that, you know, I think needs to be worn when we talk about this issue, which is the lens of relationships. Because if you look at these isms, you know, all these problematic isms in the world and the big problems in the world beyond the isms, you know, just, you know, problems in our toxic workplaces, abusive relationships, these problems do share a common denominator, and that common denominator is relational dysfunction, dysfunctional ways of relating. And so what that means is that a common denominator in ending all of these problems is relating in a way that's healthy, you know, building what I call relational literacy, the understanding of and ability to practice healthy ways of relating. And so relational literacy is not the solution to all the world's problems, but no solution is going to be complete without relational literacy. And relational literacy is based on, you know, it's made up of a lot of principles and tools. They're all, you know, anybody can learn these if they want to. It's not rocket science. And relational
literacy, for anyone listening, that just means having good relationships.
It's the understanding of an ability to practice healthy ways of relating. It's like being literate in relationships, like it's being literate in the ability to, you know, read or write, being literate and how to have healthy relationships. And so you can build it. So this is, you know, it's a skill set that people can build.
Like it's something like we're almost taught it like by copying other people. That's
by
how it's
copying
taught.
common culture, which is very much, you know, you've got celebrities and drama. Drama is always, it sells papers and it sells TV shows and it sells everything. So drama tends to be emphasized. So I see even my children, they model drama and all this sensational stuff. And you're going, oh my God, that's not going to create good interrelationships.
Yeah, or they model their parents. And, you know, I mean, I know you guys are amazing from what I've seen, amazing parents.
What I've seen, exactly. Yeah.
Many things. But yeah, I mean, we all learn this. I always say this, it's, you know, amazing to me that most of us have to learn complicated geometry that we'll probably never need to use. And we don't get a single formal lesson in how to relate in a way that's healthy. You know, and when you look at the problems in our world and in our personal lives, these are not problems that are caused by people who can't do geometry. So relational literacy is all of these principles and tools are based on this one key formula.
So once again, folks,
this is the formula.
Drum roll. Here we go.
This is the formula. The formula for healthy relating. Okay. And this formula applies to every interaction, right? It could be a communication. Communication, I should say, is the primary way we relate. It's the most important place to focus.
And does that include body language?
It includes body language. Okay. But I would say the primary way we relate is actually through words. But yes, communication definitely applies to body language. And the primary way we communicate is on social media or digitally these days. Most communication happens online. So this formula applies to how we relate to, you know, other humans, to non-human animals, to the environment as social groups and so on. And here's the formula. In a healthy interaction, we practice integrity and we honor dignity. It's that simple. And I'll break this down.
And that equals safety and security.
And exactly, that leads to a sense of security and connection. Yes, you get an A.
Thank you. Yeah.
Practice integrity and honor dignity.
And honor dignity, and this leads to a greater sense of security and connection. But let's talk about what it means to practice integrity, because they can be abstractions.
Integrity and dignity sound like words that are baked into, like, you know, the the independence, the constitution of a country or whatever. Like they sound like grand words that we don't typically use on a daily basis. Integrity, obviously, most people will understand.
I remember the first time I came across integrity, Dad found me climbing on the roof trying to bring a lovely young woman in through the window in my bedroom.
As you were 17 years old.
I was 17, no, that wasn't recently. That was when I was 17 years old. And I remember Dad made me read The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And he made me like sit down and talk about what does integrity mean and like, what is it? And my understanding of integrity could be right or wrong, but was that like, we practice what we preach. We honor what we say. We are true to our word and we're only as good as our word. That was my understanding. How does that stack up to?
Yeah, well, kudos for your dad, for one. Yes. I mean, and to make that even more concrete for people is, integrity by definition is the integration, and it's the same root, integration of our values, our core moral values and our behaviors or our practices.
But they're on alignment.
And so, it's alignment between values and practices, even more specifically.
So we practice what we preach. So that we're...
Yes, except that people can preach different things, right?
Yes.
And it doesn't mean, you could, if you're somebody who doesn't really care about compassion, for instance, you might preach something different and still practice that. But that said, the core moral values that have been found to be most commonly espoused or embraced by people and cultures all through the world are the values of compassion, sometimes referred to as caring, and justice or fairness, right? So when we practice integrity, we basically practice fairness. We treat other people or animals the way that we would want to be treated if we were in their position. Beautiful. This is, another way of saying we practice respect. So that's the practice of integrity.
Which sounds very much like a religious, in all religions of the world, they'll typically treat your neighbor as you want to be treated. Like it's a very basic philosophical concept that's baked into most kind of how you should be to be a good human.
Totally. It's the golden rule, and if you whittle down, the sort of spiritual teachings around the world, they'll come to, land on this to a large degree. So practicing integrity is treating others, practicing respect, treating others the way you would want to be treated if you were in their position. Or yourself. So the formula applies to how we relate to ourselves as well, I should mention. And we are always relating to ourselves through our self-talk, through the choices that we make that impact our future selves, for example, right? So we need to practice integrity toward ourselves as well. We can talk about that a little bit more later, but let's talk about what honoring dignity means so it's not an abstraction.
Yeah, because dignity, it's a lovely word, beautiful word, sounds lofty, sounds
very
great.
Dignified.
So dignified.
Dignified
what
word.
Does dignity? Yeah, tell us what dignity means because I couldn't define it really very well.
So your dignity is your sense of inherent worth. It's the sense of being fundamentally worthy as a being, right? So when you honor someone's dignity, you think of, it's a perception and it's also a treatment. You think of and treat them as though they are worthy of being treated with respect, of occupying space on this planet, just like everyone else. When I honor your dignity, I don't see you as in any way inferior or less worthy than I or anyone else on this planet of being treated with respect, treated the way that I would want to be treated, no matter what you have done. You could be, anyway, we'll get back to that. So when we practice integrity and honor dignity, this leads to a sense of greater security and connection. And if you think about your own relationships, and I've already seen this, I know this is the tip of the iceberg for you guys, but the richness of relationships that you have around you, and not just relationships, but relationships that are secure and connected is pretty astounding. So if you think about one of these relationships that you consider really good, many of them surely, you can probably recognize that you trust that other person perceives you, they respect you, and they see you as fundamentally worthy of being treated with respect as a being on this planet, and you feel secure and connected with them.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's so distilled. When you say it, the fundamental of human relationship are down to honor, dignity, practice.
Honor, integrity.
Practice integrity and honor dignity.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it sounds so simple, but when you distill them, it's quite profound and it's quite, it is like linking two golden rules together, that no one is better than everyone else and treat everyone the way you would like to be treated.
And I think of it as a parent, as a parent, you really want your kids to feel very safe and very secure and to really feel valued and worthy. And I guess that's the basic fundamentals for all relationships. If we treat others like, the best parenting version of yourself, really, and anyone who's a parent who's listening will want those things for their kids. And if you can treat others with that, like our mother used to always say, just give a smile, get a smile. Give a smile, get a smile. If you give a frown to the world's only going to give you a frown back. And this we used to say just when we were like 5 and 6 and she'd bake it into us. And I really think that metaphor that if we can, the same way we would treat our kids in a really loving, kind, compassionate way, if we can treat others with that, it's only the world's going to give that back to us.
Yeah, well, totally. And there's no guarantee. I mean, there are plenty of people who are, relating in a healthy way. And yet the world is what it is. And people have their traumas and they're fractured and they're conditioned in different ways. And they may not react in such a positive way. But the more you practice the formula, the more you increase the chances that another person or whoever you're relating to will practice the formula toward you. I mean, just think about it. When somebody, let's actually talk about the opposite of the formula to talk about this point.
Yeah.
So the opposite of the formula is violating integrity and harming dignity. So when we violate integrity and we harm dignity, this causes us to feel insecure and disconnected. And if you think about a relationship in your life, maybe not one in your, immediate circle, but maybe it's an online troll, somebody who's just like posting negative comments about you or whatever, chances are you do not feel that person practices integrity toward you. They don't respect you. They don't honor your dignity. You don't feel secure with them.
And
you certainly don't feel connected.
You typically, like, say even in myself, I tend to be more sensitive to these things, and I'll see someone flinging some negative comment at me or at the happy pair, and I'll feel like, I feel smaller.
You won't feel worthy.
Yeah, I feel less worthy. And I feel a little
guilt or shame or something.
Yeah, I don't feel like doing this. I feel like uninspired and deflated, a smaller version of myself.
Well, that's a perfect example. And that's what happens. Like when so I talk about when we think of the formula, like most things in life, the formula is not either or. It's not that an interaction is healthy or dysfunctional. It's more or less healthy or dysfunctional. So
it's a spectrum.
It's a spectrum, right? So healthy relationships, healthy interactions, I call relational, and not unhealthy ones, I call non-relational. And so these non-relational behaviors that you're describing, right, where somebody is not honoring your dignity, they are typically shaming. They communicate to you when somebody harms your dignity. The communication is that you are less than, you are less worthy than others. And is
that what shame is? Shame is that making someone feel less than you.
Shame is the feeling of being less worthy than others, of an idealized version of yourself, because we can shame ourselves, and many of us do this. But shame is that feeling of being inferior, morally inferior in some way. I'm not as good as, I'm less worthy than others, of being treated with respect, of occupying space in this planet, so on.
That's so
and
sad.
It's very sad. And shame is non-relational behaviors are shaming. And shame is an incredibly...
Could you give us an example? Like, so say in an intimate relationship, like if one partner is physically oppressive to another one and kind of damages their self-confidence, they might feel shame. Is that...
Even a perfect example, sometimes to my wife, I can speak with as though I'm better than her because I put things back where they go. And sometimes I do that, and it's only through awareness that I realize you're being arrogant and you're being shameful, Stephen. She just functions differently to you. And that's cool, and respect it. But sometimes I notice that I can do that sometimes, and I often feel like, ooh, that's not very nice.
Well, we all do it.
I know, but I'm just trying to bring it down to simple, like landing these conceptual concepts.
Yeah.
Conceptual concepts.
Good man. Great.
Thanks,
good work,
Thanks,
Steve.
Mel, yeah.
But that is actually a perfect example. I mean, and
it's
it is
subtle. Like, it's not like kind of we're out in the whatever.
Totally. But most shaming, many shaming behaviors, these non-relational behaviors are subtle, and they're so widespread, a lot of them are so normalized, like posting something like your first example, when people post criticisms and maybe not very nice criticisms of the happy pair or something online, how you just feel smaller. You start to shrink inside of yourself. You feel ashamed, or you feel like you've been shamed. And so it's fine. I mean, we're not going to agree with all behaviors. If you're married for any period of time, you're in a relationship for any period of time, you quickly learn that we have very different lifestyles, very different needs, very different behaviors. And it's totally appropriate if your partner's doing something that is bothering you, to point it out and to, ask to meet in the middle somehow or whatever that may be. The problem comes in when we start to think of difference as deficiency. When we see you're different than I am, therefore you're deficient, you're somehow less than. And we all do this, because we're all socialized to think this way. And because we have these psyches, these egos that cause us to compare ourselves to others and, think in terms of better or worse than. So, but the problem is when, we have in our minds the flip side of shame. Well, actually, maybe we should differentiate shame from guilt for listeners who are wait a minute.
Because guilt seems like I feel guilty. It's like, I feel guilty. I forgot to do a job at home, or
Recap, David Flame, what is shame?
Okay, so shame is where your self-worth is diminished. That's how I understand it.
Whereas
guilt is probably you feel less than about something towards another. So shame is towards yourself and guilt is towards the other, towards something outside of yourself.
Not exactly. But people say that a lot, the difference between guilt and shame. So guilt is how we feel about a behavior. Shame is how we feel about ourselves. So we feel guilty when we think I did something wrong or I did something bad. And guilt is a really important emotion. It's a pro-social emotion. It motivates us to course correct when we need to. People who don't feel guilt don't care about their impact on others typically and course correct in order to, change their behaviors in the future. The problem is that a lot of times guilt in our minds turns automatically into shame. So we do something, it's a behavior we engage in that we're like, I shouldn't have done that. I feel guilty about that. And then we get ashamed because we've basically been born into this relationally dysfunctional mess of a world that's so shaming that most of us automatically, as soon as we feel guilty, we think, oh, I feel ashamed of that. But anyway, guilt is about a behavior and shame is about how we feel about ourselves.
Okay. Yeah.
And shame is a really, a big problem for us. Shame is an incredibly demotivating emotion. Shame is we can only feel ashamed when we have learned to buy into a story, a myth that some individuals are more worthy than others. If we didn't believe this on some level, we wouldn't feel ashamed because we would recognize that no matter what we do, no matter what we say, even if it's causing harm in the world, which we obviously don't want to do, we can still honor ourselves as beings and feel a sense of worth.
Wow. Quick question to this. So say we live in a society where it's celebrity culture. I even look at my son, he plays football and he thinks Ronaldo and Messi are the most heroic humans in the world. They're non-human. And I wonder, does celebrity culture then almost rupture
an individual
dignity because we see them as greater than us, even though they're simply footballers that exist.
We've experienced a tiny bit of that where people come up and want you to sign a book, or they come up and they're really excited and whatever. And sometimes you kind of feel uncomfortable because you feel like they're looking at you as being better than them, and it's like, I'm no better than you are. There's zero. I'm a normal human, just exactly like you. So let's just be normal, instead of that kind of thing.
Yes.
Does celebrity culture disrupt our
own personal dignity?
Our own dignity?
Well, so many things disrupt our sense of, so many things do. And celebrity culture, for sure, it's just one manifestation of many. Every time you see an ad, the reason products sell, most products anyway, sell is because we've been made to believe that we're deficient, that we're not good enough unless we buy this next face cream, unless we change ourselves in some certain way. We get this car, we're suddenly going to feel like
we get abs.
But it's very short-lived. And so the flip side of shame is contempt. And this is a really, really important emotion to become aware of, because contempt is the best way to or the way that this is typically defined is it's judgment plus anger. So
contempt sounds scary. When I hear contempt, I think of some John Grisham movie and there's someone planning on killing someone.
No. It's usually,
but I'm so wrong.
In most interpersonal relationships, romantic relationships, contempt is the root cause. Contempt, yeah. It's the root cause. This of Esther Perel and all these other people, you hear them say it, that when contempt starts to manifest in relationships, that's a clear sign that it can potentially be reaching towards the end, because it's usually one of the great levers to a relationship ending.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, research has shown, John Gottman's research showed that contempt is the one emotion most likely to destroy a relationship. It is a relationship destroyer. So
judgment and anger.
Yeah, it's like judgment and anger merged. So here's the way to think about it. Like, let's actually just back up a step and think about anger, and then we can come to contempt. So anger is the emotional, it's a normal, legitimate, healthy emotional response to witnessing injustice. You know, when you see something that's unfair or you're experiencing unfairness directed toward yourself, you're probably going to become angry as a result. So you're standing in line to pay for something and somebody cuts into the front of the line and you've been waiting, you're probably going to find yourself feeling angry. You know, we think about the great injustices of the world, and, you know, anger, moral outrage even it's a normal response to witnessing injustices. Anger is a really important emotion. It's an emotion that is an indication that your moral compass is working. And it's an emotion that motivates us to take positive action on our own or others' behalf to rectify an injustice, to rectify something that's wrong. People who don't have access to their anger are often people who don't put up boundaries in their lives, you know, who don't say no. There are all different reasons for this, you know? So anger is important. When we relate to our anger in a healthy way, we can use our anger in a healthy way to create a better world, you know, or better relationships, better lives. So in a relationship, you know, an interpersonal relationship, if you notice you're feeling angry, okay, something's going on here. What am I angry about? Because maybe something needs to get discussed, you know, something needs to change here in our interaction. When we relate to our anger in a healthy way, we recognize it for what it is. And it's nothing more and nothing less than an emotion. That's it. It's a data point indicating that there may be an injustice present. Maybe there isn't, and we're just imagining something's an injustice, right?
Yeah.
When we relate to our anger in an unhealthy way, two things are typically the case. One is that we've become blended with it. That means it's sort of like we're not thinking of it as we are our anger. Instead of thinking, I feel angry, you know?
I am angry.
Yeah. Or a part of me is feeling angry, which is even better. It's a great way. If you are feeling angry and you say a part of me is feeling angry, it gives you some separation to the anger. We say, I am angry. I and the anger have become one. And often it has the charge of contempt. Contempt is the flip side of shame, as I said. It's the feeling of being more worthy than others, of being treated with respect.
There's arrogance in it.
There's arrogance in it. There's a way in which when we feel contempt, we've placed ourselves in a position of moral superiority.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Oof. And contempt is like...
Contempt, I get it. Oh.
But it can be very, very subtle. And
sneaky.
It shows up. It's sneaky.
I've
It's
seen
a
it at
sneaky
home.
one.
I've
That's
seen
contempt.
It at home. You didn't do the... And it's gone on my head. Like, it's gone on my head. It's not like outwardly, and I think I'm keeping it in, but it's probably spilling out all over the place.
It's oozing.
Yeah, so contempt is when you think you are better than someone and you experience anger as well.
Yeah, where you're feeling like you're looking down on them. It could be a sprinkling of anger. It could be a lot. I mean, you could feel contempt to a greater or lesser degree. And we all do, you know, like we all do. I mean, this is where, you know, we can talk about this later if you want, but meditation and mindfulness practice, you know, is really, really, really important in helping to offset these perceptions that we have of worth, you know, worthiness. But when we feel contempt, you know, we end up communicating with another person, you know, in a way that suggests that they are somehow inferior. We shame people from a position of contempt. So when you're feeling contempt for someone, they're probably feeling ashamed when you communicate with them because you're looking down on them in some way. And it can be very, very subtle, but it is no less really powerful. And so contempt and shame are two sides. I call them two sides of the non-relational coin. One cannot exist.
Two sides of poor relationships, like the two sides of
That's right. It's two sides of the coin, right? You can't have one without the other. You can't feel less worthy than someone, you know, unless there's somebody who's more worthy to compare yourself to, and vice versa.
Yes, they're two sides of the same scales.
We're such like what you're talking about here is like at the root cause of all injustices, oppressions, bad things in the world. It typically comes down to relationships, and you know, as you said, we aren't taught relationship skills. Relationship literacy is not taught in schools. And even when I'm hearing you're like, your formula is brilliant, like, you know, to practice integrity.
Even I'm 43 and I didn't know what contempt actually meant. Contempt actually meant.
But it's more putting words. Like, you can feel it and you can understand it at a feeling level, but to put words on it sometimes is hard.
Oh, I've experienced it loads of times in me. I've been contemptuous towards lots of times. And it's
we all have.
Nice.
Yeah, but to practice integrity and to honor dignity, and therefore it will equal typically more security and safety and better connections. And I'm just wondering, how do we apply, like if someone, like everyone listening is going, that sounds amazing, that sounds great. How do I apply that? Like, how do I start applying that to myself and go, well, all my relationships, like life, they'll always say that the quality of our life is the quality of our relationships. And
the Harvard longevity.
Yeah, the Harvard like there's so much research that backs that up, that the relationship is the real wealth of our life. And we're not taught relational literacy. So how would anyone listening or ourselves kind of go, right, how do I put this formula into practice? How do I make my relationships even better?
Time to pay the bills now. As we said, this podcast is sponsored by Vivo Barefoot Shoes. They're the only shoes we've been wearing for 6 years. And really, we wouldn't take someone as a sponsor unless we really believe in them. And this is a company, and these are shoes that we've seen it in ourselves. Our feet have become more natural. They're stronger.
They're wider. I can isolate. There's this kind of movement called toga, which sounds funny and sounds stupid, but it's where you can isolate your toes and move them kind of individually. And through wearing shoes, at least there's even research from Vivo at universities that your feet muscles will typically improve by 60% within a number of weeks of just wearing barefoot
within
shoes.
100 days.
Within 100 days.
So, and even think about it logically, that in a house, the foundation or the base of the house is the most important bit which the structure sits on. And the same way we just wear shoes without thinking about it, yet our feet are the foundation. And when you've got them in shoes that actually encourage the natural kind of movements within your feet, it enhances every aspect of your anatomy.
Yeah. So if anyone does want to try them out, Vivo Barefoot are offering a 15% off with the code HappyPear15, and you have nothing to worry about. They're offering a 100-day return policy. So if you don't like your Vivo Barefoot, you can return them free of charge.
Yeah, so check them out, vivobarefoot.com, full range of shoes for all the family, from formal to casual to kids, and everything in between. So 15% off, HappyPear15.
Well, I mean, first of all, I think there are a lot of ways to do this. And I'll say we can start with the belief system, like this deep, deep belief that is ingrained in all of us to a greater or lesser degree, that causes us to believe that some individuals are more or less worthy of being treated with respect in the first place. As long as we believe it to be true, as long as we believe that, for example, the prisoner on death row does not deserve to be treated with respect because this person killed somebody or whatever they did, we are feeding this mentality. We are feeding this mentality. So, and it's really hard for people to realize this and to step out of the mentality because it is so deeply ingrained. Most people would be like, well, yes, but this person did horrible things. What would you say about Hitler? This person did horrible things. Why should we not treat them in a way that's horrible, just like they treated other people in a way that's horrible? And, and why we shouldn't is, there are a lot of reasons for that.
Integrity, treat others like you want to be treated. So
it
comes from you as an individual rather than what they've done. It starts from you have to take responsibility for yourself.
There's that, absolutely, and non-relational behaviors, right? These behaviors that are shaming and contemptuous, that violate the formula, they're contagious. Right? And they've done study after study on this, and researchers say that these behaviors, they call them toxic behaviors, they spread like the common cold, and they're not necessarily compartmentalized. So you may feel that somebody is not worthy of being treated with respect, but the minute you act on that, you are contributing to the epidemic of dysfunction and harm in the world.
Subtle bullying.
And it is a form of bullying, subtle bullying. But getting back to your question, so what do we do? So how do we offset this? So one way is to recognize this belief that's at the core of these non-relational behaviors. And now this is what I call the belief in a hierarchy of moral worth. This belief that some individuals or groups are more worthy of being treated with respect than others.
As in celebrity versus, other people.
Well, as in white people versus non-white people, as in humans or animals, as in men or people of other genders. This myth lies at the core of every form of injustice. If you whittle them all down, like we tend to, sort of, when we're thinking of injustice and harm in the world, we tend to look at who is oppressing or abusing whom. And we target, sort of one form of oppression or abuse at a time. And it's okay. We have limited energy. We have to focus on what we care most about or where we're most effective. It's also important, though, to look at the root of all of these, the core of all of these. And at the root of all of these forms of injustice, and not just in our world, but in our personal lives, is this belief in a hierarchy of worth, belief that
this
some
person
individuals
is greater than this, and that person is lower.
is more worthy of being treated
order
with respect than others. And we do this. You can see people who are, great activists for peace and compassion. Like, let's talk about some maybe vegan activists we know who are, talking about universal compassion for all beings, and yet berating people on social media who don't share their values, or great humanitarians, who at home are demeaning their partners and their children. So because this belief is being expressed maybe on the interpersonal level, like in a family system, even as, there's some social justice activist on the collective level, talking about something else. So whenever we treat somebody as less than, it's because we believe that they deserve to be treated as less than because they disagree with our values, because they've caused harm or whatever.
And then so when I go to Poland, my mother-in-law, they keep chickens, and there's a pecking order. There's the rooster, and then he's protecting them, and you go into the pen and the rooster nearly plucks at your shins to get away, they're my hens. And I've heard that there's a pecking order amongst the hens, where they sit and what they happen. And hens are mammals and we're mammals. Is there this innate pecking order that
there seems to be a social pecking order.
There seems to be a social pecking order that almost innately we form without discussing. Is that true, or am I wrong about that? Because does that affect how we construct dignity, and that some person is greater, some is less? Is that we're almost having to think and reconstruct our natural, something that happens innately, or am I totally wrong? And I'm just curious. I'm just trying to grapple with this in my head.
It's a really good question. I mean, we have both. We are hardwired to be hierarchical in certain ways. Like as you've described, we're also hardwired to be very communal and very collectivistic in certain ways too. We depended on the tribe to survive. And we're hardwired. We know this. We're hardwired to feel empathy for others. And in order to harm somebody else, we really have to disconnect from our empathy from them. And we're hardwired to seek meaningful connections with others. So even though we've done historically, there has been a pecking order in many ways, in many societies, of course, we are now in a position, where we have, many of us anyway, have the ability to pause and rethink our actions. In the past, we would have gotten angry at our partner and punched them in the face, and we were Neanderthal, bang over the head.
Yeah.
We don't do that anymore, right? Like, we know there's a choice now not to be that way.
We just build it up inside ourselves and then go for a run or something. Hi, how are you?
Now we're just passive aggressive, like threaten them with abandonment or something. This belief, and I know I can imagine for a lot of listeners, because I've talked about this a lot, and I hear this, when I'm talking, for example, with vegans about infighting and like how important it is for us to,
what does infighting mean? As in fighting within a justice movement?
Yeah, fighting within your own group, right? Fighting against people within your own group. You've got a difference of opinion or a difference of approach or whatever it is. And, infighting it bleeds a tremendous amount of resources from a movement. And I talk about the importance of avoiding in my talks on infighting, I'm talking a lot about contempt and avoiding contempt to the best of our ability and avoiding shaming because of the harm it causes. And I will hear over and over and over again, but what about this? But what about somebody who is hurting the movement? Don't they deserve to be shamed? But what about somebody who's eating animals and they're hurting animals? Don't they deserve to be shamed? And it's so hard for us to get unstuck from this idea, that certain behaviors, like, well, if somebody is doing something that's abusive, then it gives me a free pass to be abusive to them. You know, it's so hard to get unstuck from this. But one thing that's really important to recognize is that this myth, you know, of a hierarchy of moral worth, that some are more worthy of respect than others.
Some people or some kind of like some
individuals, individuals, because this applies to animals as well, right? So this myth reflects a profound misunderstanding of human psychology. And, you know, all of us are nothing more and nothing less than our hardwiring and biology that we came into this life with, and every single experience we have ever had. We cannot be any more nor any less than that. So when we expect somebody to be different from who and how they are, that's like expecting a tree that's been rained on not to be wet. And it just doesn't make any rational sense. And so we are all quite good at putting ourselves, you know, like basically appointing ourselves the moral police. If I were you, I wouldn't have done that. Well,
moral police, that's a great
right.
one.
If I were you, I wouldn't have done that. Well, if I were you, of course I would have done that, because I would have been you. And you did that. If I had been raised in your family, and a lot of people will say, but you know, well, let's compare two people who had the exact same background, and yet one went on to be a great success in humanitarian, and the other is spending the rest of their life in prison. Well, nobody has the exact same background.
Well, we've had probably as close as you're going to get, being identical twins that grew up and work together and do everything. Yet we're still very different people, like.
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
And
I mean,
different.
And we're 99.999 genetically
and
identical.
definitely, you could still
And it
press,
shows.
there's different buttons on both of us. You could press, like, you know, you could trigger Steve in a certain way and trigger me in a different way. And we've got different, you know, emotional points. So,
yeah. And that's a great point. So it's like nobody can be different from who and how they are. And like, if you had been, you know, you had a 5-minute experience that was different from your 5-minute experience, that could have shifted the trajectory of your life in a profound way that you're not even aware of. So this doesn't mean we don't hold people accountable, you know, and encourage people to change problematic behaviors. It just means that we have to honor their dignity in the process.
And so how do we do it? So okay, like right now, everyone is the culmination of their own experience, and they can't be anything but themselves. They can't kind of, you know, it's difficult to kind of change yourself like that. You know, all of us want to be, everyone listening goes, okay, I want to better relationships. I want to be a kinder, more compassionate person. I want to practice integrity. I want to honor people's dignity, and therefore my relationships will prosper. Like, how do I do this? Like, as an individual, do I have to kind of does it start with awareness, becoming hyper aware? And it goes through phases. Like, I'll notice when I'm working on a relationship, I'm working on my relationship with Stephen, I'll be hyper aware for a bit, and then I'll fall back into the old part of Stephen's, you know, it'll be, you know, I'll be aware, and I'll be really nice and kind, and then it'll fall back and I'm better than you, why didn't you do that? You know, whatever it might, you know, it'll go up.
Judgment.
You know, so how do I apply this to learn it? Like, and everyone listening, it's the same.
Yeah, well, I mean, to your point, awareness is really important. So like, aware that there is this myth, aware that worth, you know, comparing worth, it is based on a myth, aware that we're all doing the best we can with what we have, and we cannot be, you know, any different than what we are, but it doesn't mean that we can't, you know, that we can't reflect and make choices now that help direct us toward the future that we want. And how do we make those choices? Like, what are those choices? What do they look like? So one thing that can be really helpful for people to know is that, you know, you're simply practicing healthy relational dynamics, like what we're talking about here. You can grow a lot in relationship, you know? So the formula, you can come back to this formula at any moment in time and ask yourself and just say, you know, notice. So start to pay attention to how you're feeling in an interaction. Notice if you're like feeling smaller. Notice if you're feeling like it's, you know, a good sign of a healthy relationship. It's not always the case, but very often is that it's easier for you to be your better self. You know, and then there are some relationships where you really struggle to be your better self, you know, so start paying attention to how you feel in your relationships and, you know, really learn to honor the process rather than over focus on the content of an interaction. And I'll explain what this means, because this is amazing. A practical way.
Oh, I love this one.
We've talked about this before.
This was a huge breakthrough, and I've forgotten it, but I feel like I really want this. I remember hearing it last time.
Let's look at this with communication. As I said, communication is the primary way we relate. Like, all communication has two parts. the content and the process. The content of a communication is what we're communicating about. It's the subject, right? And the process is how we're communicating. We all tend to overfocus on the content and underfocus on the process, but the process matters much, much more, right? So we, if you think about, I like to use this as an example, think about a conversation you had maybe like 6 months ago at a dinner party or whatever. It's possible that you forgot the entire content. You actually don't even remember what you talked about, but you probably still remember how you felt in that conversation. The process determines how you feel. When our process is healthy, we can talk about anything without fighting. And when our process is unhealthy, non-relational, we can't talk about anything without arguing. You might know people who are really totally on the same page about so many things, and yet they nevertheless find a way to argue. So in a healthy process, we honor the formula, of course. The formula is all about a healthy process. And in a healthy process, when we're communicating, our goal is not to be right, which means to make the other person wrong. It's not to win.
Just respect their dignity.
Right. It's not to win, which means to make the other person lose, right?
It's nearly like what you're saying is, it really strikes a chord with me and feels so true. And it also feels in juxtaposition to so much of the system of which we grow up in. Like when I hear you talk about
competitive,
so much of it is about I'm right, you're wrong. Like
I'm
so
better.
much of
I
it,
run faster than you. I have more gold medals, so therefore you should be nicer to me.
I have more stuff than you, so I'm more valuable than you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, that's exactly right. And the world is really, in many ways, this very non-relational world that we've been born into in many ways. It is constructed to socialize us, to think in terms of me versus you rather than me and you, to think of the only way for me to feel worthy is by finding somebody less worthy to compare myself to. And, or to put somebody down so that I can prop myself up. And this is, of course, very short-lived sense of worth. It's not true worth. It's a illusory worth. And so, and you're absolutely right. And this is why, when we're talking about communication, the debate model is usually counterproductive. The debate model, debating is effective in very specific types of situations, like in a courtroom, for example, when somebody's running for political office. But outside of that, so often when we're communicating, we think we go into debate. We go into okay, it's all about the content.
2 points for you, 1 point for me. How do I get a better point? I've got to take them down,
Right. I want to win. I want to prove to you that you're wrong and I'm right. And this is what, when we have a difference of want, a difference of need, a difference of opinion, whatever it may be, for most of us, the default, or many of us anyway, the default is to debate. And it's okay, if I can just come up with all of the reasons, the rationale as to why I'm right and you're wrong, we'll find, this will be over. This conversation will be over. But this leaves, think about what relationship do you want to be in where there's a winner and a loser? If there's a loser in a relationship, the relationship loses. Yeah. And so in a healthy process, the goal of the communicative process, the goal of the communication is not to be right and it's not to win. It's mutual understanding. The only reason that we communicate is because we're not mind readers. The goal of communication is to let the other person know what we think and feel and need, perhaps need, and to understand what the other person thinks and feels and needs. That is why we communicate.
But we kind of need to be reminded that every 10 minutes or every 15 minutes because the social programming is that
even you
I've got to show someone I'm better than them so they give me my worth or something. It plays out very differently.
It's the default mode that we go into, this default mode of being competitive and seeing ourselves as these, separate entities that are totally dependent on boosting ourselves up boosting our sense of ourselves up in order to just feel okay. And we always do that, or often do that, by putting others down. Even if it's just in our minds, comparing ourselves I'm smarter than this person. I'm more attractive than this person. I'm more successful, or I'm more, we're talking to people who are, perhaps activists listening to this, or advocates, I'm more moral. I'm doing more good in the world.
Wow. Cause it's one of the most profound things you just said there, which I heard at least, or that I picked up, was the goal of any communication is mutual understanding. Cause, so much of my upbringing, the goal of communication was to prove you're right and the other person's wrong.
Or was
you're
to
more
prove you're
justified.
great. To prove you're great.
Yeah, one of these.
To prove I'm
exactly.
worthy.
Yeah, ultimately, yeah. Whereas it's mutual understanding.
And so much of our worth we get, like, you know, they go hand in hand, right? So often we feel like, you know, being right makes us more worthy. Oh, see, my opinion was better than your opinion. You know,
I'm more
I've
valuable
won.
than
I'm
you.
more valuable. I'm more worthy. Like we're constantly, you know, the more we can identify, the more we can understand this myth, you know, that this sense of like unworthiness in ourselves or others results from a myth, believing in this myth. The more we recognize this myth for what it is, the less we buy into it, you know, and the more we can sort of detach from it. But this is a lifelong process. I mean, Buddha talks about this.
Like ultimately what I was, a huge amount of your work is spirit. Like a lot of what you're talking about is like spiritual wisdom, but putting it through a lens of rational, logical justification. And when you say it, it's like, wow, it's very profound. Like I feel it really right in my chest. It's like, wow, this is deep truth.
Integrity and dignity are like very lofty, like I don't know if you call them a value or what they are, but they're really kind of aspirational ways for us to be relative to how most of us are on a daily basis.
Yeah, and they can be sort of you know, goalposts for or like the North Star for us to follow. Sort of, you know, you have to keep coming back to it, as you pointed out earlier. You kind of have to keep reminding yourself and surrounding yourself with it. Like the more you surround yourself with people who are committed to sharing these values and practicing relational literacy or healthy relationality, the easier it becomes, and the healthier you become relationally. The more we mature relationally, the lower our tolerance for unhealthy relationships becomes. Like, you know, you think about when you're in your 20s and maybe, you know, your teens and right. You know, you're just like people who behaviors that you might now find toxic. It's sort of like, you know, I think about relational health being a lot like physical health, where, you know, when you're used to eating like chips, you know, Doritos every day and smoking cigarettes every day, when you put these foods in your body just accepts them. But then when you stop eating Doritos and start eating a healthy diet and you quit smoking and you reintroduce them into your body recognizes them as the poison that they are. And it's the same thing with relationships. It's like your body, you start to have this sort of like reaction. You find relationships or behaviors, I should say, non-relational behaviors or unhealthy behaviors start to feel toxic to you, the healthier you become.
Yeah, it's amazing. I always say that to my wife, like, you know, in any relationship, any romantic relationships, there's going to be certain things you're very good at as a couple and certain things you'll have weaknesses in. And I always found with my wife that I'd always say to her, like, you're like an Olympic gold medal in terms of communication. And she's definitely upped my game in terms of becoming more aware that the process is more important than the content. Because like she makes me feel very safe to say whatever I want or need to say, and she'll listen to it, or she'll tell me exactly what she feels. And she won't even flinch with anything I say. She'll go, thanks so much for sharing that. That was, you know, and it makes me feel so safe in the relationship, which is that integrity and dignity piece which you're talking about. Which
definitely.
I hadn't experienced that before in a relationship, in a romantic relationship where it's just the process is so relevant rather than the content.
And you're probably sharing information with her in a way that helps her be open to it, right? I mean, you're probably communicating with her with regard to her response, right? You're not just like spewing stuff at her that's really triggering. So you're playing a part in this as well.
The pair of us are like every person who you interact with, some you can, you know, you link in really well, and others you don't. And certainly with my wife, it's very easy. Communication is really, really easy.
And it seems mutual understanding is the goal.
Absolutely. Yeah, mutual understanding. It really is that I'm not a mind reader, you know, and Shawnee here will often say, I forgot to have my mind reading tablets today. My mind reading tablets as in like that's the deal, you know, and I think it's a funny line because some of us think like, oh, do you not know that I want to do that? And it's like, well, you didn't tell me, like I forgot to take my mind reading tablets today.
Like what role does meditation or mindfulness or the practice of growing one's awareness play in this? Because often, like in psychology, it can often seem at ends to any kind of, not necessarily spiritual practice, but meditation can often be seen as spiritual. But ultimately, it's about greater self-reflection and greater self-awareness. What role can this play in terms of our relational literacy and building our kind of ability to be better relationship people, relationshipers, relationship relators. There you are. That's the word. Yeah.
Communicators.
There we go.
I mean, they go hand in hand, you know, they really, and it depends on how you approach them. Right.
Yeah.
But really, the more, like Sam Harris says, that the most important thing any of us can do is, you know, practice, like create a healthy mind, you know, it's make sure that your mind is healthy as it can be. That's the way that he describes it. And I think that there's a lot of truth in that. It's, you know, if we haven't taken care of ourselves and built self-awareness, you know, learned how to build self-awareness, learned how to become more mindful, practice mindfulness, it's going to be harder for us to practice the formula. You know, if you just think about it, the more cluttered your mind is, the more you're not reflecting on yourself, right? So if you're not self-aware, for instance, you know, you're less likely to recognize when you're in contempt, and you're more likely then to act out that contempt on somebody else. So the practice of mindfulness, the practice of self-awareness and self-reflection, developing this inner observer, and beyond that. But let's just talk about the inner observer. That's a part of many forms of mindfulness practice anyway, you know, where you build this sort of observational muscle inside of yourself to start really noticing what you're thinking, what you're feeling, what you're needing, you know, throughout the day, so that you don't get hijacked by your thoughts, feelings, and emotions, and then act out on the people around you, who then will act out in response. And so this is a really important, I think, piece of the process. And, you know, for me, certainly meditation practice is incredibly important. And then also vice versa. We can become more mindful by becoming more relational. You know, I think of it as relational mindfulness, where, you know, in order to practice the formula, it does require you to slow down. It requires you to be present. I see healthy relationality as in some ways a spiritual practice, because to really be healthy relationally, you need to be in a greater place of presence. You need to just stop and tune into what's happening in the moment.
Mutual understanding, 2 ears, 1 mouth.
That's right. Exactly. That's right. You can't have a healthy interaction if you are not bringing yourself to some degree into a place of curiosity and compassion. You know, and curiosity and compassion are obviously what you're also trying to cultivate when you're practicing mindfulness. So it's very, very important. And, you know, maybe one way to really understand this is to look at the role of dysregulation in the problems in our relationships and also the problems in our world, because they're also interconnected. And have you heard this term before? You're familiar with it? So dysregulation, when you're dysregulated, this means that your nervous system is out of balance. That's all it means. Everybody knows what it feels like to be dysregulated, because we're all in and out of...
You could be stressed, you could be worried, you could be anxious. All these are states of dysregulation.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
We're not in kind of rest and restore and calm and present.
We're in a parasympathetic nervous system.
Exactly. So like when you're regulated, basically your nervous system is balanced, right? You can think about when you're in, again, dysregulation, like most things in life, maybe everything, I don't know, exists on a spectrum, right? You can be extremely dysregulated, which is referred to as being flooded, you know, or you can be mildly dysregulated, you know? So if you think, you know, in your perfect regulation moment, you know, maybe you're like lying in bed reading a book, whatever it may be, you know, that's your like total comfort zone. And then while it's dysregulation, you're just like extremely stressed out. When we're dysregulated, you know, we're basically in a state of fight, flight, or freeze. And what that means is that we are less rational. We have less access to our rational faculties, and we're less connected to our empathy. And of course, this makes sense. When you're dysregulated, your body and mind are experiencing a threat, and you go into survival mode. And like somebody who's drowning is not somebody who's going to be having a political conversation, sophisticated political conversation. They're just grabbing for anything that floats. So when we're more self-aware, we're better able to notice when we're dysregulated. And then we're also better able to self-regulate. And we can talk about what that looks like, because it can be an incredible tool for people, you know, to help bring themselves into a place of balance. When we're less self-aware, a lot of people are chronically dysregulated and they don't know it. or they get dysregulated and they don't know it. And the thing is that dysregulated people dysregulate people.
Yeah.
Dysregulation is contagious. You may have seen this.
Yeah,
Wow.
definitely. Yeah.
Like hurt people.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And dysregulation is contagious for two reasons. One reason is because emotions are contagious. You know, if you're around somebody who has any kind of like, especially if it's a strong emotion, you're going to probably pick that up to some degree. If you have any amount of empathy, you will start feeling that emotion a little bit. And dysregulation is also contagious because when you're dysregulated, you're more likely to act in ways that are non-relational, to do things that violate the formula. And when you do that, the other person, studies have shown that when somebody's on the receiving end of we can call these toxic behaviors, you know, or toxic communications, that person on the receiving end of the toxic communication is more likely to respond with the toxic communication and also later in the day to go out and do things that are toxic to other people who had nothing to do with the interaction. You know, so this is what I said earlier. Researchers say these behaviors, they spread like the common cold. When we're more self-aware and when we've learned to regulate through meditation or other means, self-regulate, bring ourselves into a state of regulation, we're much better able to practice the formula. You know, you could know the formula, but if you're not self-aware and you don't realize that you're dysregulated, you might end up just saying like, oh my God, it's just too hard. And, you know, that's it.
Yeah. Just let it rip. Yeah.
And
amazing.
one of the keys to regulation or one of the many tools, I think, is breath. You know, typically when one is out of regulation, their breathing is either typically
physiological responses.
is very heightened. And ultimately, if one can bring your breath down to kind of a calm, larger exhale than inhale, typically you're bringing yourself down to regulation.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And, you know, you can help regulate others. Like there's something called co-regulation.
Oh, yeah.
Co-regulation is the process of somebody with a regulated nervous system bringing others into a state of regulation. And like
when you meet someone who's really calm and slow, and it's like, oh my God, I just love their energy because it just
feel like sitting by a warm fire.
Can I bathe in your energy?
Yeah, totally.
That's co-regulation.
Yeah, co-regulation.
I like co-regulation.
Yeah. Remember there was like 30 women came to the farm on Saturday. They were doing some like spiritual meditation type thing, and they came to the farm, and afterwards I was like, geez, I could bathe in their energy.
You felt like, can I just sit down here?
Can I just like sit? Can I just hang out with you guys? I don't really need to talk. Like just sit in the same room because their energy was so calm and lovely. It was really nice.
Healing.
Yeah, but that's a great example.
Yeah.
Absolutely co-regulation. There are different techniques that people can do. Like if you're close to a person, you know, you're not, you know, eye contact for many people, not everybody, you know, sometimes physical touch can be co-regulating. But one thing to keep in mind is that very often the dysregulated person is the person who sets the tone. Like you're around somebody who's dysregulated and you're like, ugh. Yeah, your emotions start to spike. But just knowing, like being able to identify dysregulation as dysregulation instead of seeing this person and being like, what a jerk. Or, oh, this person is just like a hot mess. They're just out of control. Look at them instead and say, oh, this person seems dysregulated, you know, and knowing
my wife
that.
My wife will say to me, I think you need to go for a run or you need to go for a walk or something. You're like, energy is way too big for the room here. You need to go do something. You can't like went for dinner or something, you know, that she'll see
in the same room as you, David.
She'll say, you need to go move. You need to do something to move it.
Yeah, but that's perfect, right? And so, you know, like knowing how to regulate yourself is huge. You know yourself well enough, but a lot of people, you know, they've sort of developed these coping mechanisms over the years to self-regulate because we're constantly striving
with alcohol or with energy drinks or chocolate bars or coffee.
Or it could be porn. It could be all these
or
things.
any ways of avoiding pain.
Addiction,
all the various means that we have to avoid pain. Food.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
that's right. And so dysregulation is one of the things that keeps us out of the formula, unable to practice the formula, you know, or makes it harder to.
Because we're in our survival brain rather than in our aspirational, higher values, moral, you know, integrity, dignity brain.
That's right.
I'd love to talk about carnism because like that's how our worlds collided is really with your incredible book, Why We Eat Pigs and
we wear cows and we love dogs.
And we love dogs. Why we eat pigs, love dogs and wear cows.
Well, the parts are right in just in different orders.
I knew.
But that's sort of the whole point of the title.
Yeah, it really is. And I think it's such a good title. But carnism is a phrase which you've
Coined.
You've coined, and it's such a, like, because we grew up eating meat, as people did. That was just what everyone did. Our parents did it. Society did. That was just normal. And you know, unbeknownst that would happen, we were 21 or 22 and we realized that eating meat was optional. It wasn't a necessity, and we stopped eating animals from there on and realized that it wasn't what we wanted to do, and there was a lot of injustices and oppression around it. And you've coined the word carnism, which is really this. You're better talking about it than me. Do you mind telling us what carnism is?
So carnism is the invisible belief system that conditions people to eat certain animals. It's the opposite of veganism, basically. And, you know, often we assume that only vegans and vegetarians follow a belief system, but the only reason we might eat pigs but not dogs, for example, is because we do have a belief system when it comes to eating animals. So this is one way to think about carnism. It's this invisible belief system, though. Still, it's largely invisible because it's dominant. And then sometimes people say, well, you know, in the West, we eat pigs but not dogs. But in some places, they eat dogs. But carnism is, you know, it's a global system. So in meat-eating cultures around the world, people, you know, all learn to classify a small handful of animals as edible, and all the rest they classify as inedible and disgusting to consume. It's just that the type of species consumed changes from culture to culture, but the way we think about and relate to the species that we've learned to classify as edible is the same. It doesn't matter where you go in the world. So whether it's dogs that you're eating or pigs that you're eating or cows that you're eating, we all have learned carnism has basically created this mentality in all of us that are born into carnism.
And it's the same formula applies to that, because if I'm going to eat an animal, I'm obviously not respecting its dignity because I believe that I'm morally, quite likely morally superior because I'm taking its life. Like, I am part of the process of taking its life,
That's
whether
right.
I'm just eating it or.
But you don't even notice that, like, I thought it was fascinating what you said there, that it's like vegetarian or vegan, it's a choice. But also carnism is a choice, but we don't even know it. It's just, it's the
like,
default, it's the default setting.
It's a bit like unrelational, or what do you call it?
Dysregulated.
Poor relationships is the norm. Like, you know, most relationships aren't about mutual understanding. It's about so many other subtle things. It's a bit like carnism is just the norm. Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. And it's tricky with carnism. It's a choice and it's not a choice at the same time, right? Without awareness, there's no free choice. And when people aren't aware, like, you know, when I grew up eating animals, and throughout so much of my life, nobody ever asked me how I felt about eating animals, if I wanted to eat animals, if I believed in eating animals. Eating animals was just the way things are. You know, it was just a given. It was the norm. And so I never felt that I was actively making a choice when it came to eating animals. It was a choice, but it wasn't a choice that was like a conscious choice.
Yeah.
You know, so talking about carnism is really important for, I think, a lot of different reasons. But one important reason is because it makes it really clear that there is a choice. There's, you know, when you are eating animals, you can choose not to eat animals. You know, this is one belief system, but there are other belief systems that exist as well. Veganism is not, you know, a belief system, and eating animals is just somehow morally neutral or a neutral set of behaviors. But maybe even more importantly is that carnism is not just a belief system. It's a particular type of belief system. It's an oppressive system. It's a system, an ism that is structured the same way that, you know, sexism or patriarchy is structured, or classism or racism, you know, and it's based on the same mentality that drives these other problematic isms. It's the same non-relational mentality that we've been talking about, which causes us to think of, you know, certain individuals as less worthy of having their interests honored, you know, and here we're talking about lives and deaths. It's really important to say that I'm not, and never do I, compare the victims of these different systems of oppression. The experience of each set of victims will always be unique, but the mentality that drives them is the same. It's the same mentality that causes us to disconnect from our empathy from others. and from our rationality to a large degree. So like, for example, if you imagine, this is the example I always use, imagine that like, you're not a vegan and you're sitting down and you're eating, biting into a hamburger, and your dining companion turns to you and says, well, that hamburger is actually made from golden retrievers. Chances are what you had just thought of as food, you now think of as a dead animal. So your thoughts here completely changed. Your perceptions completely changed. And therefore your feelings will completely change. What you just felt was delicious, you now suddenly feel is disgusting. And now your feelings drive your behaviors. So your behaviors probably completely change. Instead of continuing to eat the hamburger, you probably want to throw it in the trash and maybe even take to the streets and protest. Carnism distorts our perceptions, our thoughts, disconnects us from our natural feelings, our empathy, and drives our behaviors. So through carnism, we don't see dead animals as dead animals. We see them as food. We perceive them as delicious, and we eat them. So your reaction to the golden retriever burger, that's your authentic reaction. That's the way, you would react, that you react to the idea of eating an animal that you haven't been deeply, deeply conditioned to disconnect from.
Yeah, deeply is so true, because I remember when we were very little, we used to go to our granny and granddad's every Sunday, and we'd have to drive there. And I remember passing by all the sheep and going, lamb. We were going to eat lamb, and like granny always cooked lamb on a Sunday, and there was lambs in the field, and it was, Daddy, is the lamb in the field's the same as the lamb that granny feels? And somehow, obviously you trust your parents and you follow your parents, and you just kind of, no, it is the same, but don't worry, we all eat blah, blah, blah. And you just kind of went along with it. But the start of the programming had, the modeling, obviously it started because you just follow what your tribe does. And then when you start to question it, if you're, unless you're strong and really understand it, the culture tends to consume you.
It just pulls you right back in. Yeah, it just pulls you right back in. And children do. Like a lot of children will at some point question it, be like, oh, where does chicken come from?
Yeah.
Well, chicken comes from chickens. What? Chicken comes from, wait, we're eating chickens, and then we get re-socialized and pulled back into this carnistic cocoon of unknowing. And so this mentality, I call it the carnistic mentality. It's the same. It's this non-relational mentality that causes us to violate the formula without realizing what we're doing.
It's all based around dignity. It's the dignity bit that we're typically violating. Oh, both. Actually, integrity, because we're not treating
it's the integrity
chicken the way we want to be treated.
Or the way we imagine our dog would want to be treated. Yeah. Right? Like it's a lot easier for us to practice the formula toward our dog or our cat because we recognize them as beings, and we haven't been so deeply socialized to think of them as abstractions, as objects, to disconnect from them. And frankly, many, many people, when they're up close with chickens and with cows and with pigs and even with fish, do not feel comfortable eating them. When I was working on my doctoral dissertation on the psychology of eating animals, and I was interviewing people who killed their own animals for food, they would say, I don't name the chickens I'm going to kill. No way. And, one guy was like, I named some chickens and that's that, not going to kill them. I mean, some people can override this natural impulse, their empathy, but we can override our empathy when it comes to not harming humans as well. It doesn't mean that's the right thing to do. But most people are very uncomfortable with the idea of causing unnecessary harm to other animals. Most people cringe at images of animals suffering.
I find it amazing. I think they put lots of rodent poison down near the beach, somewhere down there. And I saw a big rat on the middle of the footpath, and you see everyone going past going, oh, or like they're mostly disgusted, but sometimes I've seen a fox or something there and everyone walks by and goes, oh, the poor fox, and it's going, you hypocrite. You probably had chicken for dinner and you probably had bacon at least once this week and you're giving out about the fox. And like, obviously it's so deeply socialized and most people just do it because that's just what everyone does and don't think about it. But the irony, the fox gets empathy, after it's been killed, whereas a chicken or a cow or any of these other animals don't typically get
You're
any
totally
empathy.
right. And I would say, if it had been a pig on the beach, the individual pig, people probably would have stopped. or a cow on the beach who was also dead, lying there dead or suffering, people probably would have stopped and expressed empathy because their defenses, their carnistic defenses would have been broken through. So let me explain what I mean by this.
Carnistic defenses. Yeah. It's amazing.
So we are, because we are hardwired to feel empathy for others, because most people care about other animals and would never want to contribute to their suffering, especially when that suffering is completely unnecessary, and also very extensive. Carnism needs to use these defense mechanisms, to get us to continue supporting it, essentially. These are psychological defenses that distort our perceptions and disconnect us from our empathy for these animals. And so one defense is, to simplify it, we'll call it abstraction. We learn to think of farmed animals as abstractions, so we don't think about pigs as having their own personalities, their own characteristics, as individuals with, unique lives that matter to them, just like all of our lives matter to us, just like our dog, we know our dog's lives matter to them. We just think in our minds, a pig is a pig and all pigs are the same. Another defense is objectification, so we think of farmed animals as objects, as things rather than beings.
Commodities.
So, as commodities, which they literally, are being used as. So when we refer to the chicken on our plate, we refer to that as something rather than someone, right? But when our carnistic defenses are broken through, when we see an individual, so say we see an individual chicken who's lying on the beach, who's been poisoned, and there are no other chickens around, that chicken's not an abstraction anymore. That's an individual. That chicken is not necessarily seen as an object, especially if the chicken is still slightly alive. We break through carnistic defenses, and you can see this over and over again. People go to petting zoos to pet the farmed animals who they would rescue if they saw suffering. And, then they may go to the grocery store next door and leave with packages of bacon and eggs. But breaking through the defenses is so important. And, and one of the reasons that I wrote How to End Injustice Everywhere, I wrote it for a lot of reasons, but it's because many people who are aware of the fact that injustices toward humans are, reflect this, a problematic mentality. They may not have given it a name before, but, a problematic way of thinking, don't include animals in the conversation. And they don't recognize that the very same mentality that causes us to harm the dignity, violate our integrity, and harm the dignity of humans causes us to violate our integrity toward animals and harm the dignity of animals. And that this mentality will reproduce itself. It's like we could achieve justice for all human beings, but as long as we are engaging, we are like watering the seeds of the non-relational mentality when it comes to animals, we're going to keep reproducing this same problematic mindset.
Same with nature as well.
Same with nature.
Dominion over nature.
Totally.
There's no respect and there's no dignity for nature. It's just, they're once again, they're commodities which we can abstract.
Totally.
How does one prevent oneself becoming morally superior? So say someone is an ethical vegan and they do it because they're pro-animal rights and they're sitting with someone who's eating a chicken sandwich and they're loving it. They're going, oh my God, I love this chicken. Oh, why won't you eat it? And you're sitting there going, because I'm so ethical. How does one prevent one becoming morally superior?
Yeah.
Like, how does one, because it seems like it's almost like I'm better than you. And it's in our competitive society. How does
one-upness society.
Yeah.
And especially when it comes to morals and ethics, where people can say like, well, I'm not being superficial. It's not that I'm saying I'm prettier than you or I'm smarter than you. I'm just more moral. I'm just a better person than you. But it's the same mentality.
Quite often when they say, I'm not saying this because, that kind of means like they're saying. Like
they're saying it totally because.
Right.
Generally.
Yeah. I mean, again, it comes down to recognizing, to focus on behavior rather than on character, you can say, and to keep the language really real and concrete and accurate, right? So if I'm looking at somebody who's eating animals and I'm not eating animals, I'm not looking at them, for instance, thinking I'm a better person than they are, because if I were raised the way that they had been raised, in their brain and their body, I'd be eating animals. There's just no question about it. How could it be any other way? What I can look at is their behaviors. And I still wouldn't say my behaviors are better than theirs, or my behaviors are more ethical than theirs. That's an abstraction. It's impossible to, even compare or judge. I can say that my behaviors are causing less harm, probably causing less harm to animals than their behaviors are. I mean, that's a whole other conversation, but keep your focus on the level of behaviors if you want to compare at all. But I would say get out the comparison.
That's once again, it's back to the ultimate spiritual truths, which are the backbones of all morality and religious, even morality. It's like, do not judge. Like, do not judge in a sense, because you're particularly in a sense, because typical judgment leads to I'm better, I'm worse, I'm, comparison, and probably not really honoring people's integrity and their dignity.
Right. And it doesn't work for you either. I mean, first of all, it's not even strategic, right? So for people who are trying to create a more vegan world, for instance, getting out of a place of judgment is one really, really good way to help further the movement, because people who feel judged are usually people who shut down to a message, know, so they're less likely to hear our message. Having said that, I do want to honor the fact that judging is normal and it's inevitable. And we do it until we get to a point, where, I don't know, we're enlightened or something. We've broken out of the ego. It's just really a matter of degree. And a lot of people who are awake to the fact that we are living in the midst of what can only be called a global atrocity when it comes to what the animals of this world are experiencing are deeply, deeply disturbed, understandably, rightfully so. Many of whom are traumatized by what they've seen and feel an incredible, sense of urgency around the message that they're trying to communicate, which is commendable and also understandable, and dysregulated, which is understandable. So I want to honor the fact that, I don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good here, and to give vegans one more thing to feel like they have to do better, and don't be judgmental.
Thou shalt not judge.
Don't be recognize. Yeah. You cannot wake up to the atrocity. There are many atrocities happening in the world right now. You cannot be awake to these atrocities and not get kind of messed up in the head once you do, to some degree. And it's going to affect you. And it takes a lot to be vegan in a non-vegan world. We are daily, our deepest sensibilities are offended. You walk out the door and you see a meat truck, and that to you is a truck of body parts driving down the street. This is what many people who are vegan have to live with every single day, and are doing the very best they can with this reality that they have been served. And at the same time, it serves all of us to step back from this place of judgment and contempt for people who are eating animals, and recognize, this is another reason that understanding carnism can be helpful. Recognize that good people can participate in harmful practices, and it doesn't make them bad people. It makes them people who have been deeply socialized and conditioned to act a certain way. And you may, like a listener, might be thinking, well, hey, I was born into this system and I stepped out of it. I saw earthlings and that was it. I never ate animals again. Well, I wish that were true for everybody, and it's not. People who stop eating animals immediately, or even who stop eating animals at all, they're often outliers. And we tend to assume that everybody operates the way that we do. And if not, they should. Yeah. So if this worked for me, it should work for you. If I did this, you should be doing this. What's wrong with you? But we are wired so differently and so differently. And what seems so simple and reasonable to one person can feel like moving mountains to somebody else. So just as an example, years ago, I gave a talk on carnism. And this woman came up to me afterwards and she was crying and crying. She said, I agree with every word you said. It absolutely breaks my heart when I think about what's happening to the animals. And she said, I'm married to a man who is this is back when I lived in the US. She's married to a man who is, he hunts and he eats a lot of meat and he has totally different values. And I have 3 children and I have no education and I can't go on my own. And I know my husband will never go for this. And I feel really trapped right now because I want to change and I'm afraid to change and I don't think I can. And she articulated, I think, an experience that a lot of people have quite beautifully in a way. People people's relationships don't have to end because one person becomes vegan, but often they do. It causes disruption in relationships, and for some people that disruption feels intolerable. Or for some people, just doing this is not.
They feel so judged. If the other person changes and becomes vegan, they feel so judged their behavior. It's like, oh, I don't want to.
That's right. Or they're afraid their partner's going to leave them. Person will say, I can't go vegan. My partner will leave. I can't go vegan. My family will have a reaction. And some people are so uncomfortable with conflict, like deeply uncomfortable with conflict for so many different reasons that, they'd rather, I heard somebody describe this once in a book. I don't remember who, but this person wrote, people pleasers would rather walk barefoot across the North Pole than say no. Wow. Sometimes. And we're wired very differently. And this is why when we're talking about making changes like dietary change, I find that it's always helpful to ask people to be as vegan as possible, whatever that means to them. And then you create sort of safe parameters around it. But for people listening and thinking like, how do I stop judging? Stop judging by recognizing that people are very, very different and people make the choices they do for reasons that make total sense to them. It doesn't make them bad people. And think about things that you do. Like, I don't like the word hypocrite. I don't even use the word hypocrite because I think it's something some construct we've created, but we all live with contradictions, So I'm sitting here talking to you about veganism and ending global injustice, and I'm wearing these little boots that I got from, I think
were cute.
I think Deichmann's or something. And I think they came from China. They were probably made, they were made in China and then shipped to Germany and made in a factory. And I don't feel good about that. And I thought about it actually when I was buying shoes a few years ago. And I thought I should really buy used shoes. Oh, it's so hard to buy used vegan shoes. Oh, maybe I should wear vegan, like used leather. And I was like, okay.
I'm not wearing shoes at all.
Forget it. Maybe I'll go barefoot. Yeah, then there's the germs. So, we all live, we live with so many contradictions. And so one way also to kind of take away this judgmental edge from our own sort of like internal, our own experience is to just appreciate that we have inherited a mess. We have inherited a very messy world. We live in a very imperfect world. And what that means is that we have to make imperfect choices. We have to make different choices in this world than we would make if we lived in a perfect world. So maybe we have to feed our rescued cats meat because they can't tolerate the vegan cat food that we normally use, right? Well, in a perfect world, we wouldn't have rescued cats and we wouldn't have to choose to save one animal by contributing to the slaughter of another. But we all have to live with contradictions in our lives. And so the more we can appreciate this and practice that non-judgmentality to ourselves, our primary relationship is with ourselves, the more spacious we become.
Oh, I like that. Here's a more spacious world.
More what?
I like that spacious. We become more spacious. We become less tight and narrow. And
yeah, we have more wiggle room for our beauty. So often, again, we're trying to be worthy and, feel like we want to present this shiny, happy, perfect face to the world. And we just don't realize we're all fallible, messed up human beings, and our beauty is in our messiness. That's what makes us unique. That's what gives us the depth. That's what makes us, able to be vulnerable. And when we can appreciate that our beauty is in our messiness, and not in spite of it, then we give ourselves a great gift and we bring this gift to our relationships as well.
Jeez, you're brilliant.
Oh, I love it. I love your message.
I feel very inspired. I really do.
For anyone listening who goes, yes, Melanie. So you've written a number
7
of books. Your latest book is How to End Injustice Everywhere. It's a really good read and it's quite technical, but it really breaks things down in kind of a practical, and it looks at the greater systemic isms and injustice and how one can, using the formula, can address them.
Yeah, so this is like the formula is at the center of it, but then looks at the different systems. And then I have a book on how to, just a one-stop guide to building relational literacy called Getting Relationships Right. For anybody who really just wants to build relationship skills. And so I mean, it's it's always a work in progress. But I think if we can, just remember, people do say, I don't know if we talked about this before, but a lot of people believe that, oh, well, I have to love, because I was saying earlier, our primary relationship is with ourselves because we're always relating to ourselves. So practicing the formula toward ourselves is really, really important. And, in terms of like breaking this sort of judgmental loop that we get stuck in, one way to do that is to just sort of pause and ask if we're listen to your internal dialogue. How are you talking to yourself? What are the choices that you're making that are about to impact your future self? Are you outsourcing things that you don't like to your future self, thinking your future self is going to want to do them more than you do? So,
I like that. Or am I giving too much now that later on I'm going to be exhausted?
That's right. But just, again, building that inner observer and asking, am I practicing the formula toward myself? And am I feeling ashamed? Am I shaming myself? A lot of us shame ourselves. We compare ourselves, with some idealized version of ourselves. This is how I should be. This is what I should have done. Pause and notice that and try to, bring yourself back to practicing this loving formula towards yourself. And, but a lot of times we think we have to love ourselves before, you've probably heard this. We have to love ourselves before we can love somebody else. And I think that was an idea that somebody came up with a long time ago that sounded really good. That's just sort of caught on, but that's probably not true. Like, new parents and partners can say, like, sometimes we learn to love ourselves through loving others. And this is the beauty of practicing the formula. Practicing the formula is practicing love ultimately towards somebody else. And the more you can do that, the more you practice the formula towards somebody else, the more the formula becomes normalized to you, the more you're exercising your muscles of compassion and curiosity, and the more likely you are to do it to yourself.
It's amazing.
Yeah, really very profound. Like for something that I could have initially judged as being rational and logical, it's deeply spiritual, and it's
well, really primal morality. We're talking about human morality here at the core of all interactions and relationships and social structures.
Really. How to build a better world.
Yeah, I like that. I love that phrase, primal reality. That's good. Sounds like a album.
I didn't even notice I said it.
It just came out.
It's a coffee shop. Wait, not morality. Reality? I said morality. Primal morality. That's cool.
Morality, yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
Some things that I've got out of it. Okay, so awareness, whatever activity that helps promote more the observer, that you can become more of yourself and how you're interacting in the world, creates room for more self-reflection, and that you can honor the formula. Other activities that you can do is practice the formula on yourself.
Yeah, or the primal means of communication is mutual understanding. It's not about one-upping and being better than others. And that's such a basic thing.
When I hear that, I feel guilty. I'm like, whoa.
Oh, crap. I'm trying to impress everyone I meet that I'm great. Show them that I'm great so they pat me in the back and go, you're a great lad.
Well, then practice the formula towards yourself.
You're a great lad.
I know. Thanks. Thanks, Steve. Thanks. One up for you. One up for you. Gold star for you.
Thank you.
Yeah. No, and yeah, it's just so.
Yeah, I love your work. I think you're wonderful, and it's really an honor to have you here and to get to spend time with you.
Thank you. I mean, the honor is mine. I can't wait to go on the tour and see. I mean, what you have created here and built up, and this beautiful community you've surrounded yourselves with is just, it's testament to the energy that you are putting out in the world and the relationality that you're committed to. I mean, this is like a case study in the formula. It's like the formula on a meta level, wide scale formula. It's really amazing. Thank you. Great. It's been incredible.
Great. Oh, great. Thank you, Melanie.
So
Melanie's book for anyone listening is out, How to End Injustice Everywhere. It's wonderful. It's a great read, and it's really accessible to any injustice in the world. And you've got a great book on carnism as well, of which maybe you're better at saying the title. You say the real title.
You want to try to guess?
No, he tried.
How to stop, or why we eat pigs. We wear
you got it wrong.
Cows, and we love dogs. No. Why we love dogs, eat pigs, and wear cows. Yeah.
Got it.
Yes,
you got it.
Okay.
No turtles in the title.
No turtles in the title. I love it. But thank you so much, Melanie. You're wonderful.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
That
was great. She really is very spiritual. Like it's hugely spiritual.